All right, so now that we have the to-do card structured, we created our buttons, we have our badge and the title and the time is being showed. But now we have to start adding some functionality to this to-do card, or at least setting up the functionality for our to-do card. We know we have three buttons, one for update, one for delete, and one to mark the progress as either undo or complete. Um, but how is that going to actually occur? What is the functionality going to be? Where, well, we know that it's a button, so we know that we're depending on something or someone to click on it. So we know we have the functionality of on click, and the on click for each individual button will do its own certain thing. So for updates, what I'm gonna do is when the person clicks on the update button, it's gonna bring up the modal and is going to allow the user to update the to do that they created. The delete should automatically just delete the to do once they press the button. So that's just going to be um, uh, a function that takes an ID that's going to delete the to do item. And then you have the button to either undo or mark it as complete, which will also just be another update, really, because all you're going to do is go into the object for the specific to do, change the previous value to the new value, and then update the whole object or send a request for that update with the new attribute value. So that's a lot of talking. Let's actually start doing. All right, so I'm gonna have to do a little bit of hypotheticals because we're about to create another component really soon that's going to provide some information to this to-do card. But let's create some hypotheticals, right? We have this props, right? This prop is gonna hold all our props that we're injecting into this to-do card, like we did with the to-do prop, right? Because we're injecting this to-do prop and we're retrieving the title and retrieving the created at attribute from that to-do. But we can also pass in other props. We can pass in functions, right? Because in this case, we want to have a function that will allow us to update, that will allow us to delete. And that function is going to hold the request to actually communicate with our API. So instead of actually directly putting the API request in the to-do card, we're going to inject those requests through a function, through the props. So that's going to make a lot more sense when I actually start typing how it's going to look like, but that's what we're going to do. So let's show an example with this first button, right? So with this button to mark as either undo or complete, we're going to create an on click. We're going to listen for the on click event, and then we're going to open that up. Oops, can't type today. Open that up and start defining our function, and within that we're going to start writing up some logic. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to have a variable that's going to hold the data of our current to do. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use a let, which is just going to be a variable, right? Let, and then I'm going to call this current to do, and that's just going to equal to props dot to do, right? It's just going to equal to the current to do item, but I'm going to store it in another variable because we're about to update the attribute to change it from either undo or to complete, right? It really depends on what the current value of the to do progress value is. So if it's undo and the person clicks on it again, then it's going to go back to complete. But if it's complete, then it's going to go back to undo if the user presses complete. So it's going to be vice versa. And because it's going to be vice versa, all we got to do is go into current to do. We're just holding, the current to do value. Put dot progress, right? Because we're about to set it's equal to not data dot progress. Not current to do dot progress. So essentially what this is saying is, remember, progress is a true or false. If it's true, then the button's going to show up as undo. If it's false, then the button's going to show up as complete, right? So if I press the button, then we just want the value to be the opposite of what it was. So if it's true, we want the value, if we're undoing a true, we want it to go back to false, which we're going to use the not, right, to take in the opposite value and assign it to the progress attribute. And with this new progress value, because we're taking the opposite, we're going to take this new to do object and update it in our API. But the only value that's being changed is progress. but to update, we'll have to go and send the whole object. So that's essentially the logic for this. We're just making sure that the old progress value is equal to the opposite value now. So if it's true, it's going to be false. If it's false, it's going to be true. And then now what we can do is, like I said, this is going to be hypotheticals, but what I intend on doing is in our props, so props, right? I'm going to send a function to update our to do item, right? And that update function is going to be, or is going to hold a request to our API to update our to do item. So I'm going to call it update to do, and I expect for it to expect one parameter, which is the object that we're trying to update, which is going to be the to do item. And remember, we just created a new variable that is holding the new to do. So then I'm going to pass that current to do as the parameter value, and that should be it. Right, so right now this doesn't exist yet, but hypothetically I'm going to have a function that's going to allow us to make a request to our API. So our next button is going to be the update button, and all this is going to do is it's just going to allow us to open up a modal to show the dialog to update the values that are in our modal. So this is not going to make a request. It's just going to simply have a boolean that's going to open up a modal for us. So we're still gonna need an on click, and we're going to make that equal to a function. But all this function is going to do is I'm going to pass in a prop called set open. We had something similar before. This is just going to hold a function, or going to hold a use state function to allow us to change our variable of an open variable, which is going to open up a prop for us. So if I set this equal to true, it's going to open up a modal that's going to allow us to update our to do item. So this is just going, when we click on the update button, it's just going to open up a modal for us. So all we got to do is change the state to open up the modal. Then there's the last button, which is delete. We're going to also need an on click, and then open that up, create this function, and just as the name implies, all we're going to do is delete an item. When a person clicks on this, we're going to delete the to do. And how do we know which to do to delete? Is simply by using the ID of the to do. So we know the to do ID because we're currently in the card, right? And we have the to do from this prop that's being passed, right? So this to do is simply an object with everything. So it has the ID, the progress, we know the title, everything. So all we got to do is when we pass in the prop, that's going to have a function called remove to do. The parameter that it expects is the ID. So all we got to do is do props.todo.id, right? So we're going to remove that to do based on the current to do in this card's ID. And then we should be good to go. All of this is hypothetical. We're going to actually define it in a few, but that is the logic, right? We're going to have one that updates the to do based on the progress. So we're just going to flip the current progress from either true to false or false to true, and then update that by making a request using the function that we're going to pass through our props. Then the second one is simply going to be a set open function, which is just going to be from our use state, which is going to update a variable to let us know, or let our application know, to open up a modal, which will show the current to do's values and will allow us to update it in a modal. And then the last one will be remove to do, which is just going to take in ID, and then it's going to make a request to our API with the ID to remove it based on the ID that we specified. So now let's actually start, let's create a component that will allow us to iterate through our to-dos and actually start defining some of these functions so that we can make a request based on the buttons that we click on. So what I'm going to need is I'm going to need an additional component called to-do list. And to-do list will be pretty much will allow us to iterate through all our to-dos and demonstrate it or show it on the screen. Right? So in a grid format, I expect, and I'm going to use the keyword RFC again. So it's gonna iterate through all the to-dos, or if there is even a to-do in the database. Because if there is no to-dos in the database, then there's nothing to iterate through. But if there is, it's gonna iterate through it, and each individual to-do is gonna have its own to-do card, and it's going to show each one, and it's gonna allow us to either update, delete, or mark as complete for each individual to-do item. So we're gonna start defining how that looks right now.